All right, let's dive into this world of fermented foods. You sent over such a fascinating mix of stuff articles about gut health, a TED Talk about the history of fermentation, even a philosophical take from a yogi. We've got it all.
Sounds like we've got a lot to cover.
We do. But today we're zeroing in on those science-backed benefits of fermented foods, especially for gut health.
Ah, gut health, the big buzzword these days.
It is, but think of this deep dive as like your shortcut to becoming a fermented foods expert.
I like it a crash course.
Exactly. So to start, can we just break down what fermentation actually is?
Yeah, definitely.
Because I feel like a lot of people hear the word bacteria and immediately think food poisoning.
Right, not exactly appetizing.
Not really, but obviously we're talking about something very different.
We are. It's all about the right bacteria. Fermentation is essentially like controlled rotting, almost, where we use microorganisms like bacteria and yeast to transform food.
Controlled rotting. That's a pretty vivid description.
It gets the point across. They break down sugars and starches. You see producing acids, gases, or even alcohol in some cases.
Okay, so they're kind of like alchemists, these bacteria and yeast.
In a way, yes. And this process not only preserves the food, but also changes its taste texture and boosts its nutritional value.
So it's not just about adding good bacteria. The fermentation itself actually changes the food to make it better for us.
Exactly. And different cultures have been harnessing this power for centuries.
The TED Talk had some pretty crazy examples.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, it talked about fish sauce in Southeast Asia
Ah, a classic.
and garum, which is like the ancient Roman version of fish sauce.
Right, I've heard of that. One for the history buffs?
Definitely. And of course, you've got soy sauce in China, kimchi in Korea.
All these amazing flavors coming from fermentation. It's amazing how people around the world figured this out, you know?
Yeah, it really shows you how resourceful humans can be.
For sure. And that diversity in fermented foods isn't just interesting, it's actually healthy.
How so?
Well, eating a variety of fermented foods exposes our gut to a wider range of good bacteria, which then leads to a more diverse and resilient gut microbiome.
Okay, so it's like we're building a stronger army of good bacteria in our gut
Mm-hmm.
by eating all sorts of different fermented foods.
Exactly. You got it. And a diverse gut microbiome that's linked to a whole host of benefits.
Like what?
Well, there was research from the University of Turku in Finland that found individuals who regularly consume fermented foods had a 25% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
Wow, that's huge.
It is.
But let's get real for a second. A lot of people hear fermented foods and they picture like these elaborate processes and ingredients.
Yeah, it can seem intimidating.
So what are some simple ways to incorporate these foods into your diet, for the average person?
You can start small. Swap out regular salad dressing for kefir for a tangy probiotic boost.
Oh, well, that's a good one.
Right. Or keep a jar of sauerkraut or pickled beets handy for a quick snack.
Easy and delicious.
Exactly. And you can use miso paste as a base for flavorful, gut-friendly soups. You'd be surprised how easy it can be to fit fermented foods into your everyday meals.
Those are some great tips. Now, I'm curious about these probiotics everyone's talking about.
Yeah, the superstars of the gut.
How do they actually work in our gut and what makes them so beneficial?
Think of probiotics like the friendly reinforcements for your gut's army.
I like that analogy.
They're the good bacteria that help to balance the microbiome and crowd out the harmful ones. And fermented foods are packed with these beneficial microbes.
Okay, so we're essentially giving our gut a boost by eating these foods.
Exactly. And that can impact everything from digestion and immunity to even mental health.
Our gut impacts our mental health.
You heard that right.
I know people always say go with your gut, but I didn't realize it was that literal.
Well, there's a lot of research emerging about this gut-brain connection. Officially, it's called the gut-brain axis.
The brain axis. Okay, got it.
This axis, it's like a super highway of communication between your gut and your brain, where signals constantly travel back and forth.
Fascinating.
And fermented foods, by promoting good bacteria, they can actually send positive signals along this highway,
Wow.
influencing things like mood focus and even how we respond to stress.
So it's not just about digestion. Fermented foods could potentially impact how we think and feel.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it?
It is.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we dive deeper into those mental health benefits, I think it's important to understand what sets fermented foods apart from simply taking probiotic supplements.
That's a great question. I take a probiotic pill every day. So does that mean I'm covered? Are they the same thing?
Well, it's not quite that simple. Probiotic supplements can definitely be helpful, but they often contain isolated strains of bacteria.
Okay.
It's kind of like if you were to get a single species of plant for your garden, It might look nice, but it's not a thriving ecosystem.
I see.
Fermented foods, on the other hand, they're like a wild, diverse garden bursting with life.
I like that analogy.
They offer a wider variety of beneficial bacteria, and they come with this added bonus of fiber and other nutrients,
Right.
which are crucial for a healthy gut.
So it's more of a holistic approach then, getting those probiotics from real food instead of a concentrated pill?
Precisely. And those nutrients found in fermented foods, they play a crucial role.
Hmm.
For example, a study published in the journal Cell found that the fiber in fermented foods acts as a prebiotic.
Oh, interesting.
Essentially, it's food for those good bacteria. This helps them to flourish even more and further enhances the diversity of the gut microbiome. It's this synergistic effect.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned earlier the link between fermented foods and mental health.
Yeah.
That's something I'm really eager to unpack.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating area of research.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to that gut-brain axis we were talking about.
Right.
Scientists are now discovering that the gut microbiome actually produces a variety of neurochemicals, including serotonin and dopamine,
Hold on.
which play a major role in regulating mood, cognition, even sleep.
Wait, so those feel-good chemicals aren't just produced in our brains. Our gut bacteria have a say in this too.
It's a two-way street. By
Wow.
improving the diversity and balance of our gut microbiome, fermented foods can actually influence the production of these mood-regulating neurochemicals.
Okay, that's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is.
Are there any studies that back up this connection between fermented foods and mental well-being?
There are quite a few emerging studies. A recent study published in the journal Psychiatry Research
Right.
found that individuals who regularly consumed fermented foods reported lower levels of anxiety and stress.
Wow.
They also scored higher on measures of cognitive function and overall well-being.
That's incredible. I'm definitely going to be upping my fermented food intake after this. But I'm also wondering about athletes. Since they're pushing their bodies to the limit, could fermented foods benefit them too?
Absolutely. Athletes put immense stress on their bodies,
Yeah.
which can disrupt the delicate balance of the gut microbiome. This can lead to inflammation, decreased nutrient absorption, and even hinder performance.
Oh, wow.
Fermented foods, with their ability to support a healthy gut, can help athletes recover more quickly, absorb nutrients efficiently, and potentially even boost their endurance and energy levels.
So could fermented foods be like a natural performance enhancer?
There's definitely potential there. A study conducted at Appalachian State University found that endurance athletes who consumed fermented beet juice before and after workouts had improved muscle recovery and reduced markers of inflammation compared to those who didn't.
That's amazing.
Hmm.
It seems like fermented foods could benefit a wide range of people, from those struggling with anxiety to athletes striving for peak performance.
Yeah.
But let's get practical again. For those of us who aren't, making our own kimchi at home,
Right.
what should we look for when choosing fermented foods at the grocery store?
That's a great question. Not all fermented foods are created equal. The key is to choose products that are alive and teeming with those beneficial bacteria.
So we're looking for the most vibrant, bacteria-rich options we can find.
Exactly. That means opting for raw or unpasteurized fermented foods whenever possible.
Okay.
Pasteurization, while it's important for safety in many cases, it can unfortunately kill off a lot of those beneficial bacteria.
Ah, I see.
It's also worth paying attention to the ingredients list.
Right.
Look for products with simple whole food ingredients and avoid those with added sugars, artificial flavors, or preservatives.
Makes sense. It's like anything else. The more natural and less processed, the better. But I've also heard that smaller local brands might be a better bet than those mass-produced options. Is there any truth to that?
Definitely. There's something to be said for supporting smaller producers who are often more dedicated to traditional fermentation methods and using high-quality, locally sourced ingredients. They might not have the same shelf life as those mass-produced brands,
Yeah.
but that's often a sign that they haven't been overly processed or laden with preservatives.
So it's about quality over quantity when it comes to fermented foods.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Your local health food store or farmer's market can be great resources for finding high-quality fermented foods
Right.
and learning more about the different brands and production methods.
Okay, this has been incredibly eye-opening. But I do want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, balance. Are there any potential downsides to going overboard with fermented foods? Can you have too much of a good thing?
That's a great point. Like anything, moderation is key.
Yeah.
While fermented foods offer a ton of benefits, overdoing it could lead to some digestive discomfort.
So even those good bacteria can cause issues if we overload our system.
Exactly. It's like introducing a whole new population to an existing ecosystem.
Right.
It takes time for things to adjust, and you might experience some gas bloating or changes in bowel movements initially. Start slow, listen to your body, and gradually increase your intake as you feel comfortable.
Good advice.
Yeah.
What about people with histamine sensitivities? I know some fermented foods can be high in histamines.
That's definitely something to be mindful of. Histamine is a natural compound found in many foods.
Right.
And some fermented foods like aged cheese, sauerkraut, and fermented meats can contain higher levels. If you're prone to histamine intolerance, it's best to approach these foods with caution and moderate your intake.
So it seems like awareness and paying attention to your individual needs are key when incorporating fermented foods into your diet.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that fermentation is a natural process,
Yeah.
not a magical cure-all.
Right.
While fermented foods can play a significant role in supporting our health and well-being, they're most effective as part of a holistic approach.
Hmm.
That includes a balanced diet, regular exercise, stress management, and quality sleep.
It's about creating a healthy lifestyle, not just relying on one specific food group to solve everything.
Precisely. Now, before we wrap things up, I think it's worth talking about the bigger picture.
Okay.
As fermented foods gain popularity,
Yeah.
there are some ethical considerations we should keep in mind.
What do you mean? Aren't all fermented foods inherently good since they're well natural?
It's not always that black and white. As with any food that becomes trendy, there's a risk of mass production and industrialization, which can lead to compromises in quality and ethical sourcing.
So even with something like fermented foods, we need to be mindful of where they're coming from and how they're produced?
Exactly. Support brands that are transparent about their sourcing and production methods. Look for those that prioritize sustainable practices, fair trade, and organic ingredients whenever possible.
Okay, I'm getting a sense that informed consumerism is key here, just like with so many other things we eat and buy.
You got it. And as consumers, we have a real power to shape the industry. By choosing products that align with our values, we're sending a message that quality, ethics, and sustainability matter.
So it's a vote with our dollars for a better food system overall.
Exactly. And as we've seen throughout this deep dive, fermented foods offer this fascinating glimpse into the interconnectedness of everything.
It is fascinating.
They connect us to ancient culinary traditions, the power of microorganisms, and even the potential for a more sustainable and resilient food future.
Well said. I have to say, I'm walking away from this deep dive with a newfound appreciation for fermented foods and a much longer grocery list.
I'm glad to hear it. I think the most important takeaway is to keep exploring, stay curious, and enjoy the journey of discovering all the delicious and beneficial ways that fermented foods can enhance your life.
That's a great note to end on. So for all of you listening, I encourage you to dive into the world of fermented foods. Experiment with different flavors, find what you enjoy, and most importantly, listen to your body. We've given you a lot to think about, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of your fermented food adventure.